process is relatively the same.
One of the mistakes I see is they get inspired by KPIs and they want to measure everything all at once without really much thought to it.
But if we're not clear to the people that we're delegating tasks to on what the results are that we're holding them accountable to deliver, then we've failed as leaders in running our business. A lot of times business owners aren't clear in what they're looking for.
Maui Mastermind presents the Business Coach Podcast, answering your questions and providing real actionable insights for building a better, stronger, more profitable business without sacrificing your time, life, or freedom anymore.
Hi, David Finkel here from The Business Coach. In this week's episode, my co-host Rich Wood and I are going to be diving into the world of key performance indicators, KPIs. And I look at this and frame this conversation as if this is the hidden manual for how to actually use KPIs as a business owner, as a business leader, that you probably never were introduced to before. We're going to simplify it to the two main types of key performance indicators, and then how specifically do you as the owner of the business use these KPIs, but most importantly, how do you push KPIs down so they become living, breathing, real parts of just the how you go about operating your business at the department or pillar level, and also at the individual staff member level. Rich and I dive into specifics. We give examples from medical. We give examples from construction companies. We give examples for service businesses. And as you go through and listen, what you'll leave with is a clear understanding in a very new and fresh way what KPIs actually are and what are the 4 steps to implement them in your business, and then how you operationalize pushing that down to the deeper levels inside your company. And what that's going to allow you to do is to get more of your company's best time, attention, talent, and money focused on those narrow few things that make such an oversized impact, which will help you increase profit, scale faster, make your business more durable, and most importantly, when done right, and when you spread KPIs beyond just you, but to the other team members and into the systems and culture of your company, you're going to make your business more owner independent so you can enjoy what you're doing a lot more. I think you'll enjoy this week. Well, welcome to another edition of The Business Coach. I'm your host, David Finkel, and I'm joined today by Maui Mastermind Business Coaching Director, Rich Wood. Rich, thank you for joining us today.
David, I'm thrilled as always to spend time with you and the rest of the group here.
Now, I know you're in North Carolina. You just recently moved out there. I'm curious, before we get into today's topic, which we're going to dive really deep into KPIs, key performance indicators.
Right.
How do we actually use them to focus our business's best attention, time, talent, and money on the most important things? How do we use them to simplify and to deepen our understanding of our own company? And how do we use that with other people so that we make it easier for other people in our business to think smarter about their company? Before we jump into any of that, I just want to ask you, when you look about, over the last week, I'm curious, what's something you did for yourself that was just a blast to do? You always make me smile when you share things that you do. Like one time I remember you told me you actually had this craziness to jump out of a perfectly healthy airplane with a parachute, and you thought that was fun. What have you done in the last week that has made you smile?
So I think that the things I probably have done in the last week that made me smile was, well, it's Christmas time here, and we're in the process. I love Christmas, so it made me smile to put my Christmas tree up and put the lights on it, and to put up ornaments on the tree and get everything set up for Christmas. So that is actually one thing that I did that truly made me smile.
That's great. I didn't know you were a Christmas tree guy. I remember when I started dating my wife way back when, she used to have us do a Christmas ladder. It never occurred to me. We used to decorate a ladder that she had in her apartment, and that was one of the fun things. And we kept that tradition all the way up until we had kids, at which point the traditional tree just clobbered the ladder, totally dominated the ladder.
I love that ladder to decorate.
So let's jump into KPIs, key performance indicators. And so first of all, let's talk about what a KPI is. And then we're going to go into how a KPI is used, which KPIs matter, and the concept for it. So start us off, Rich, if you want to just give us your view of what a KPI a key performance indicator actually is. And then after that, I want to dive into a much better frame for a business owner to think about KPIs and to use with their staff. But give us the broad understanding of what a KPI is as a concept.
Yeah, so as a concept, for me, a KPI, a key performance indicator, is something that is measurable, that helps us define the execution or the completion of a task. So typically, being a numbers guy, I typically think KPIs are generally oriented towards a number, a numerical metric that tells us whether we've achieved an 80% efficiency or an 85% efficiency, or whether we've grown the business by 2x or 3x, or whether we've increased our lead generation by 50 leads or 100 leads. So it's typically a number that we're looking for that tells us whether or not we've met a targeted objective.
Yeah. And so here's the way I want to frame it out. We've used this with clients, Rich, you and I, for now years and years. And the idea behind it is to think about it as, what are the most important results that we're trying to get in an area of the business? So you brought up marketing. Let's do both for marketing, and then we'll come back to for operations in a moment here. So right. In the marketing world, you might say that the most important result we have is to deliver qualified leads to our sales force. That might be the single most important thing. Or if I'm in a company where we have our marketing department is actually selling something, it might be dollars sold is the most important result, off of their website for online sales. One of our clients manufactured bicycle products. They sold through distributor networks, but they also sold online. And how do they have, $50,000, $100,000 of monthly sales? So the dollars sold per month online was the most important result. And so we think about this as the result that we're most going after. Now we ask, what's the leading 1, 2, or 3 elements that if we focus on the most important 1, 2, or 3 elements, and these numbers go really well, they'll lead to accomplishing that result the best way. So in marketing, let's choose that if our result is a number of qualified leads we pass over to our sales force, and let's say we want to go from 100 leads per month, which is our historic norm of qualified leads handed to the sales force, we want to find ways to increase that by 20, 30%, this quarter. Great. So what are the most important leading indicators that if we did X and Y, and these numbers did really well, they would lead to more leads going into our sales force? And that might be various things. Like if I do most of my lead generation online, that might be, our most important thing might be our conversion rate of our pay-per-click ads. What's our cost per click? Or it might be the conversion of the landing page they go to. Can we go from a 4% conversion to a 6.5% conversion on the landing page? And that differential right there might be the most important part. So it could be for us, it could be the cost per lead, or it could be the conversion rate on a page, or the leading indicators that lead to the result. So Rich, as you think about this, because you've had to describe this to hundreds of clients over the years, who, one of the mistakes I see is they try to measure, they get inspired by KPIs, and they want to measure everything all at once without really much thought to it. And by helping them to say, well, rather than trying to measure everything, let's identify the most important result, and what's the KPI, the result indicator that we're going to track, and what are the most important 2, maybe 3 leading indicators, the leading numbers that if these numbers go well, filter into it. Share with us a little bit about your experiences of getting people to simplify KPIs and not trying to make it overwhelming and track everything.
Yeah, great question, David. So I think one of the challenges that a lot of business owners have is in trying to get to a refined top 2 or 3 key performance metrics, leading indicators that's going to get them the results that they're looking for. And I try to work with my clients in the context that focusing on results that get the numbers. So what is it that you're truly trying to get at? How does it drive towards the ultimate business objectives that you're trying to reach? Is it dollars? It's usually typically driven by dollars. So you want to think about the key indicators, the key numbers that are going to drive you towards something that delivers a return on investment. or increases profitability through efficiency. So it's those things that drive the top 2 or 3 things that drive you towards the ultimate business objectives that you're trying to get out, and how it drives down into each of the pillars of your business.
Yeah, I mean, in an earlier episode of the Business Coach, you and I were talking about a company's fewer better, those 4 or 5 most important elements of a business. What's their biggest limiting factor? What's the 1 or 2 elements that drive profitability at their core that they need to pay attention to? What's their biggest opportunity? And so oftentimes a result indicator is going to be about one of these things. And probably you're going to have your key results indicators for marketing and for operations and for production and for other areas of the business. So we talked about for marketing. Let's talk now maybe for an operations pillar of a company. And let's use a manufacturer. So let's say you're a home builder. You're making homes. Like, we have a number of clients that do either remodels, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 remodels, or they even do $2-3 million home builds from custom home builds with that part that are clients of ours. So you might say for them in production, the most important result that production is going to be, there might be 2, right? We might say the most important results are going to be maintaining profitability, which is gross profit margin is the most important result indicator, and production volume, which might be a certain dollar amount of home being built or a certain percentage of construction being completed in this period of time. I'm curious, Rich, what might be a leading indicator for example, gross profit margin for a home builder, if production in that home builder company is most responsible for delivering gross profit as a margin and also the volume of build, so that we get not just the percentage of gross profit margin, but we get the actual dollars of gross profit, what might be 1 or 2 leading indicators for gross profit margin?
So one of the leading indicators for gross profit margin for a manufacturing type of company, I think, well, first of all, people need to understand that gross profit margin is driven by cost of goods sold. So if you think about what are your cost of goods sold, you can develop KPIs around your supply chain, if you will, that's delivering cost of goods sold to help you meet your ultimate objective. So developing KPIs around the concept of cost of goods sold is something that's going to affect your gross margins. And I think that sometimes people lose sight of the fact that you can compete elements of your supply chain one against the other to drive your cost of goods down. So that's one metric. The other metric that is a key element of manufacturing or of home building companies, for example, is time. So anything that costs you time, which is labor-driven process, is a KPI that you want to think around how you can reduce the amount of labor in any given step in the process. Ultimately, that's going to lead to lower cost of goods. Ultimately, it's going to lead to higher gross margin if you can squeeze out labor time in the equation and or squeeze out cost of your supply chain.
What you just said there sparked a couple things here, and it's really important. So you prompted me, we should step back for a second.
Right.
We've talked about it in other episodes of the Business Coach, but if you're not sure what we mean by gross profit, you take your total sales, let's say it's $10 million of total sales. You subtract out what it costs you to produce your product or your service, called cost of goods sold or cost of sale. And then what's left over is our gross profit margin.
Right.
That might be $3.5 million for that builder or $3 million for that builder. Then I still have to take off my ordinary expenses, my fixed and variable expenses, sales commissions and administrative costs and accounting, etc. And what I'm left with is my operating profit, the profit that comes from the day-to-day operation of the business. All right. So you just talked about how cost of goods sold, if we're going to optimize our gross profit margin, if that's the result indicator we're trying to keep in mind, then we say, what's the most important element that goes into our gross profit margin that production controls? Production doesn't control the sales price. Sales controls the sales price. If I sell that custom home for $2 million, I get one gross profit margin. If I sold that same build for $2,326,000, so another $226,000 on top of the price, my gross profit margin is definitely going to be larger, all things
Right.
being equal. But production doesn't get to go back to the customer and say, hey, I know we agreed on 2 million, but we're now going to charge you an extra $250,000 more. I mean, it would be nice, but we don't get to do that. So you said we control supplies, right? Materials. We control labor. And when you went back to the labor part, because a construction company, we can control supplies to some degree, especially for scrap and wastage, but that's a harder one. A traditional manufacturer, that's one that we're going to have as a big leverage point. But a builder, that's less of a point. Yes, I can maybe negotiate a better rebate for my materials or negotiate somewhat better prices, but that's a tougher one. But the labor cost is huge. I might be paying $25,000, $30,000 per month per crew. And if that crew can get a house done in 6 months versus 8 months, I've just picked up quite a bit to my gross profit margin, all things being equal. I love that. And then so I might want to measure as my leading indicator, my leading KPI might be to affect gross profit margin, it might be the pace, some measurement of the pace of how fast we're building, or some measurement about what's the utilization of my crew, of my labor to produce the result. So those might look like, things like what percent of, days plus or minus with our production timeline. At any given moment, I want to know, am I 2 weeks ahead of schedule? Or am I 4 days behind schedule? That might be a leading indicator that if I do that well, I'm going to be able to deliver that result of gross profit to my company that I'm responsible for as production. And it might also be, here's one that I really like using for construction, is scope creep. A measurement of scope creep, which I see it happens all the time. $2 million home build. Rich, I'm building you this home. You come to me and say, hey, David, you're making the retainer wall 3 feet tall, but it really should be 5 feet tall. Come on, this is a $2 million house. You're going to nickel and dime me? And what I need to do is I need to go back to you and say, well, I know we agreed on a 3-foot wall. Is it important for you for that 5-foot wall? It is. Let me put together what the extra cost would be for that change order. And then I need you to sign the change order that says your price just went up by 50 grand. Otherwise, there goes my gross profit margin. We had a builder I was working with. We'll call this builder Chris. And Chris came to me. I remember having this conversation, Rich. He got hammered. They were making really good money. And then they took their eye off the ball. And when they took their eye off the ball, that's when they started looking for coaching. Right? I mean, when everything's going well, coaches, who needs a coach? I can do it all myself. But he started having some issues. And he was working with one of our coaches, Mike, and he was a really nice guy, and I had a conversation with him as well, along with Mike. And where it became obvious that one of the biggest elements was scope creep was killing them. They were pricing their jobs to have a 20% gross profit margin on these new home builds. But what was happening for them is by the time they were done with scope creep, they were down to 12% on the gross profit side, which meant after all their expenses were paid, their profit was gone. That 8% differential was basically pure profit for them. And so we fought scope creep, and we looked and started measuring what that number was. And one of the KPIs that we can use to measure scope creep would be, what percentage of change orders of extra cost is accounted for in change orders. Your goal should be, as a construction company, 100%, right? We want 100% of that we're getting paid for. Or if I'm going to give them goodwill, it's going to be 5% of the time, not 90% of the time. Does that spark anything from you, Rich, as you hear me say that? I'm curious because I know you've dealt with the same thing.
Yeah, so I've been involved in the contracting world personally and with clients as well. And I do know that change orders is where most contractors make higher margins. So they typically get higher margins on change orders. That being said, the key performance indicators, I do believe for a contracting company, so things that cost labor time is money. Things that take longer is money. So you can have KPIs on schedule. You can have KPIs on labor hours. You can have KPIs on the cost of your materials. There's a lot of different ways that you can get lower costs on materials by shopping your supply chain, by increasing the volume of your purchases. So there's a lot of things that you can do once you know what the key performance indicators are that move the needle of your gross margin. You can start to dial in how you go about implementing changes in your process or your procedures or your systematized business elements to squeeze out more margin. And you can certainly increase the top line by increasing the price of a product or a project, or you can squeeze out elements of your cost of goods, which are all the things we talked about to get higher gross margin. So it's about balancing all of these together at the same time.
And this is important. So if we take a step back here, what we're really saying is in an area of our business, and let me frame this, in an important area of the business, we want to ask, what's the most important one or two results that this area of the business is supposed to deliver? Marketing is supposed to deliver leads, for example, or marketing is supposed to deliver online sales volume. Production is supposed to deliver gross profit margin and gross profit. Those are examples that we use. Those are the result indicators.
Right.
And then we said, what are the biggest leverage points that if we paid attention to X and Y and did X and Y really well, they would do the most to improve these result indicators right now. And we make X or Y into a number. We make them into a KPI, into a metric.
Right.
And if I focus on improving these leading indicators, I'm reasonably assured if I chose good ones that it will mean that the result indicator will move the right direction. Cool.
Exactly.
So now we got to go move on here, Rich, about how do we get these things to be real? You know, the two big mistakes I see, and I'm curious what you see, is number one, the person tries to say, oh, I should have numbers, I should have metrics, I should have KPIs, and they start making up like 20 or 30 KPIs all at once without having thought about it in a structured way. Well, we've given the solution to that. One or two results indicators, the most important leverage points into a number that lead to the result indicator. The second mistake I see is people make a KPI, but they only ever look at it once a month or once a quarter. It hasn't become a real thing in the company. Have you noticed that as well?
Yeah, so I would echo the point that you have to stay focused on the top 2 or 3 KPIs, the leading indicators that get the best results. It's like focusing your time, or in the focus areas in our strategic action plans, focus on the top 2 or 3 KPIs that are going to maximize the results on gross margin or the results on what your leading indicators are trying to drive out. So I do see that many business owners try to focus on, they try to pick up too many KPIs, number one. Number two is that they don't build a dashboard that allows them to track the progress against KPIs on a frequent enough basis. More importantly, they don't set budgets to know what it is they're targeting so that they can drive the performance through managing budgets against the KPIs.
Yeah. And when I hear you say budgets, that means that, hey, we've got our target. We want the gross profit margin to be at a minimum of 18%, but we really would like it to be ideally 22% or greater, for example, in that home builder side. And on the leads, we want to generate 130 leads per month this quarter. And so when we have the target, the budget, we can see here's what we were going after, here's what we actually have, and the delta, the difference, gives us plus minus the percentage, and that draws my attention to say we had targeted 130, we're at 110, we're off by, and I don't know the exact number, that's 17, 18% we're off, or whatever the number is. I like that. So once I have my dashboard, I need to find a way to make these things real, not just to drive my once a month thinking or my once a quarter planning, but how do I get it to drive my team's daily and weekly focus? That's the game right there. Right. And to do that, I need to make my KPIs real with my team so that it becomes part of the conversation in the company. So I go to my marketing people today, and I talked with them 4 days ago. I talked with them today. Hey, you had said that right now our target is 130. We're at 110. What are you doing this week to push us to 130? We make the KPI conversation part of our living, breathing context in the business. Comments from you on that?
Yeah, so my comments would be that I think that the KPIs have to be leading indicators for what we want each pillar to try to drive towards for performance that ultimately drives the performance of the business. But at the end of the day, we have to have the leadership or the execution side of the equation be tied to moving the needle on each KPI on a regular enough basis where people are paying attention. I typically try to drive incentives with the team to keep their eye on the ball, moving the business forward through bonuses or through compensation structure. So I give them skin in the game to get the results that we have them focused on, that we're trying to get on.
I love this idea that now they have stake in there with that part, and what I would encourage any person in our audience right now, if you've never done KPIs before, start with the skin in the game being attention or non-financial incentives. Once you've gotten good at them, then aligning financial incentives, tongue and groove, becomes much more successful. But if you screw up the KPI in a way that screws up the money, you ruin a relationship. So get the KPI part right first, then you can tongue and groove fit in financial. But I can make an incentive that has no money and my risk of screwing it up is much lower.
Right.
And so what it might look like, I need to explain to my team, what is a KPI? And I might even break it down to the level that every team member in an area might have one or two. Hey, Joe, Carlos, for you, here's the most important contribution for you as field supervisors on our construction crews, running our two separate crews. For you, days plus minus on our timeline. And number two, managing scope creep with that part. Those are the two places that if you keep your attention right there, will do the most to protect that gross profit margin. So I need to describe what it is and why it matters, not just for the company, which they need to understand, but also for them personally. Hey, Carlos, here's how you're doing a great job, and here's why it matters for you. And then finally, here's how you might go about doing that. Here's some of the thoughts we have that we've learned works well. This is why we have certain planning systems in place and certain production systems in place for the timeline, how we schedule out our subs to make sure that we can not have a gap where, we need to get the electrical guy to run wiring through the house before we can close up and drywall, can't screw up our timeline, whatever it might be. Here's what we've learned. But over time, when Carlos understands it in his bones, what it is, why it matters, what some of our past success rate of how we've done it, he'll make better decisions right there on site when he has that information. I can see you nodding along with that. What comes to mind as you hear me say that?
Well, what's coming to mind, David, is that there's actually one element that we haven't talked about for the contractor side of the business, and that is having contracts in place with the clients. So the clients that we're working with know what the contractual obligations are, that sets the tone for metrics that we're holding ourselves accountable to with them: cost, budget, and time, right? So those are key KPIs that we're holding ourselves accountable to contractually with the client, but then we translate those directly into execution of the business as the key KPIs that we're holding our subcontractor teams accountable to. So I think it starts with the contracts with the clients. It's the expectations we set with them that define the key leading indicators that get flowed down into the execution team, and that get tied to the execution team saying, this is what's important to the business. This is why we're all working here. This is how we're going to stay with a livelihood moving forward, is to hit these KPIs, hit these targets. So to me, it all gets tied together.
You might not know this, but I did an earlier episode of The Business Coach was called The Accountability Loop. I might be off slightly in the title. So anyone watching or listening to this, you're going to want to. I'm going to take a bit of an aside. So you said something really important, which is, when you set a contract with your customer, and the contract can be a formal written thing that's signed, it can be an informal set of expectations.
Right.
Your customer can be a third party who's actually paying money into the company, or it can be an internal customer, like the sales team might be the customer for marketing. Operations might be the customer for the sales team, right? So we can look at all these different pieces with that, but the accountability loop says that on a complicated relationship and I'm producing something of value for that other customer, internal, external, doesn't matter, I have to manage that relationship such that we agree upon, here's what the result looks like. And here's one way of measuring what the result looks like are our results indicators.
Exactly.
And it ties back in, right? And now
That's right.
along the way, if I notice that I'm plus minus on my performance on that, I can not only work to fix it, but I can also now have a vocabulary to go back to my internal or my external customer and to reset expectations so
That's
that
right.
at least I can keep them happy with that part. And they can trust that they know that I will be responsible enough as a professional that when things are on track or off track, I will communicate that to them so that they can count on me. I'm a person or a department that they can trust. Yeah. I never made the connection that way with that in this way in KPIs, Rich, but I loved it. It was a good aside. What would you comment on that before I bring us back to close out KPIs?
Yeah, so I would say that the concept of KPIs has to start with what are the results that we're trying to get to. They have to be simple and relatively straightforward and measurable. Number one and number two. And number three, as we flow the KPIs for the business down into the pillars of the business, down into each of the operating entities of the business, the process is relatively the same. Much like it is when we're trying to set contracts with our outside clients or customers to provide goods or services, those set the leading indicators for what we're trying to drive out with the business we're executing, same as it is with the business that we're trying to grow and scale. So the concept, the principles are the same, and they get applied the same way. They are just differentiated within a pillar by pillar basis, or they get differentiated from one type of market segment to the next type of market segment. But it's not rocket science. It's all kind of the same process. We just have to keep it simple so that we can measure it and track it and have a closed loop system to change the behaviors to get the results that we're looking for.
I really like this idea that what we do at the enterprise level, at the business level, of here's our most important 2 results for the company, and here's the leading indicators that would most influence that, the leverage points that most influence that. We can now go at the pillar or department level, marketing, operations, finance, collections, for example. Now we can push it down there. The person who's responsible for collections. Hey, Sheila, the most important result you're on the payroll to get is dollars collected. Leading indicators for you are 2 things. Number one, probably the most important, is the speed of collections. Right. We need to push the average collections as low as possible in terms of the speed. If our average collection days are currently now at 47 days, your target by the end of this quarter is to push that down to 35 days, because we know the faster we collect, the more of the money we collect. Your result indicator for dollars collected and the percentage of what is actually due us that we collect, those are the 2 results indicators. Here's the leading indicator. So we went from company to department, finance or accounting, to the individual in finance and accounting, to Sheila, who's our accounts receivables clerk. And I loved your idea that we push this thinking down. Comment from you on that, then I'm going to close this off on the subject.
Yeah, I think the one comment I would make is that it's important for business owners and pillar leads to be clear on what the objectives are and what the key results are that they're looking for out of their team, and then define a simple enough set of KPIs for each of the operating elements of the team that they can measure to change performance against to get the right result. A lot of times business owners aren't clear in what they're looking for. They're not clear in the results. And as a basis for that, they're not clear on what the metrics are that they're using to measure their team by, which results in confusion of the team and loss of progress against your goals.
And as I hear you say that, what we know our best clients do is when they think about a position in general, how do you manage a position? Well, exactly. When we think about who we need for that role and what that role is, we don't just think about, Sheila as our accounts payable clerk. She's responsible for sending out invoices and following up phone calls. And this is the mistake that so many business people do. They think about a role and they think only about, here's what you're needing to do. You do action 1, you do action 2, you do action 3, you do task 4, task 5, task 6. But what we tell our clients to do is start by asking the question, what's the most important results? How does this person, you heard the question, right? How does Sheila create the most value as an accounts receivable clerk? Here's the single most important result she's on the payroll to generate. Here's the 2 or 3 results she's on the payroll to generate. From there, now I say to do that, here's the roles and responsibilities, but I need to start with the actual result. And then I can say, well, here's how you and the company will know you're doing a great job. You should never have to wonder, Sheila. You'll always know exactly where you stand. You'll know where you stand by the dollars that you collected for the company and by the percent of our actual bill that you actually collect. If those two numbers stay at this level and this level respectively, you're doing a really good job. If you can get them up to this level, you're doing an outstanding job, a world-class job. If it goes below here, we're going to have to talk about some remedial course of action because that's below standard. And now I can manage that. Go ahead, Rich.
No, I was just going to say that just like in the strategic action planning activities we talk about, it really is the same system that you apply progressively through lower and lower levels of the organization. But if we're not clear to the people that we're delegating tasks to on what the results are that we're holding them accountable to deliver, then we've failed as leaders in running our business. And I think it sounds complex, but it's not. And it takes time for sure. But the more you get it right, so spend the time up front, get it right, so that you can guide the performance of your business progressively to compound the results that you're looking for and get to where you want to go.
I think that's great. My last bit of input here, then I'll give you your last opportunity to share your last thoughts here as we close this out. We've got to make KPIs real. And so we've given you the framework. Start with what's the most important result or results. We make that into a number. That's our result indicator. What are the most important leverage points to accomplish that result? We turn these into our leading indicators and we push that down in a nested way. We make that real by bringing that into the conversation each day. I say things like, hey, Jose, your KPI is about conversion. Right now, we're at a 12% conversion rate on the sales process, and your goal is to get to 15%. What's your best thinking about how you're going to increase that conversion rate this week? Right. I make it living, breathing in what I do. The last comment I have is we can't assume that our team members understand what we've just said here. I mean, you as a business owner in the world, you probably get to some degree, especially after listening to this episode, what KPIs are and how to use them. But you can't assume that your staff does. So to keep it simple, we help them with looking at what's one result, the most important result you want them to focus on, and what's the one, possibly 2 numbers that if they make these 1 or 2 numbers go better, higher, lower, bigger, smaller, whatever the way would be, would do the biggest impact to make this result number better. And if we can break it down to that micro level and make it part of the conversation when we interact with them daily, weekly, monthly, what you're doing now is you're making KPIs living, breathing devices to focus your company's best talent and attention and resources on those fewer things that make a bigger difference. That's how we scale a company. That's why our clients can grow at compounded annual growth rates 5, 10 times faster than the average privately held company. Rich, what last words on KPIs do you have for our audience?
So I guess the last words I would offer is that success isn't gained through hope and prayer. Success is gained through implementation of an accountability framework that's measured and tracked and used to progressively build on the results that you're looking for, the leading indicators. So the KPIs create the foundation of accountability systems framework that you use to move the company forward, that you use to move each pillar forward, and that you use to get the results that you're looking for. So it's not a hope and a prayer, it's a reasoned scientific process.
I love that. Success is via implementation of an accountability framework that's measured and that is progressively implemented. I love that. That's a great way of framing it. So to our audience, what are the action steps for you? Rich and I, our coaching for you is as follows. Number 1, pick one area of your company, not every area. Pick one area that currently is one of the most important places for your company to focus. Maybe it's on production. Maybe it's on accounting. Maybe it's on operations, maybe it's on marketing, whatever it is, pick one area and ask yourself, in this area of the company, what's the single most important result or the two most important results that this area of the company is responsible for generating? Turn that into one or two numbers respectively. Those are your result indicators. And then ask, what are the one, two, possibly three, but one or two things that would drive each of those result indicators? Those are your leading indicators. And just start with that. Make those leading indicators what you focus in on and see how they impact changing the result indicators, and play with this concept. That's the place to start, not across the whole business. Our coaching to you is to do it for one area of the business first, gain some success, gain some experience, and then progressively go to another area of the business, and then another area of the business, and then start driving it down to the individual teams, and then the individual people inside those teams later on. Thank you for spending the time with us here on The Business Coach. We look forward to seeing you on a future episode. Thank you again, Rich, for joining me today.
Thanks, David. Had fun. See ya.